Hey, good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for letting me come in and talk to you a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about ATV, UTV safety. My name's Pat Engelhart. I'm a certified safety professional. I work at the North Dakota Association of Counties. We work in this big group called the County Employer Group. So we cover all 7,500 county employees across the state. So all 53 counties. And then we also have three combined law enforcement centers, Lake Region, Southwest Multi-County, and then the Dakota Women's Correctional Center. So 7,500 employees. We deal with every weed control department across the state, and ATV, UTV safety is kind of a big deal for us. We got an echo there. You need me to? We're good now? I'm the echo. Okay. So today I'm just going to go over kind of our heavy hitters. If you're using ATVs and UTVs side by sides for application purposes, you've probably run into or are familiar with the hazards of using that equipment as part of your occupation. OHV fatality. So that's how the feds classify them. So that's ATVs and the side by sides. 16 to 18 over 2,000. That includes recreational deaths. And so recreational deaths for ATV and UTV usage, that's the vast majority of those fatalities that are going to happen are through recreational usage. But there are, on average, 10 to 12 occupational fatalities a year. So that's people that are out using it for a variety of purposes. We'll occasionally get a law enforcement fatality when they're doing search and rescue or something like that. But really, a lot of those occupational fatalities are through jobs that require things like spraying product on your rangeland or what have you. Nationally, 1 in 3 injury accidents involving those OHVs occur on the roadway. Again, the vast majority of that is recreational usage, but we do see occupational. If you're out and you're spraying your ditches along your county roads or your state highways or what have you, people aren't paying attention. And then, if you get T-boned in a side-by-side by a Ram truck, I mean, you're dead, right? Because there's no airbags, there's nothing. So kind of a big deal with that. In county government, what we're seeing, our number one cause of injury is either a flop or a rollover. So we call it a flop when it doesn't do at least a half a roll. So you're on your quad and you're spraying and then you hit a washout and then you flop on your side. Maybe your leg gets stuck underneath or something like that. And then we count it as a rollover if it at least goes 180 degrees. That's either side to side or front to back. That's the vast majority. We get several injuries like that every year. Um, some examples of the injuries that we see with the spraying applications on the ATVs and UTVs. Now, this one wasn't a county employee. This was a municipal employee. But OSHA did a big case study on this one back in June 2003. A lot of people are using those jackrabbit styles of tanks and spraying equipment on the back of their quads to go out on their rangeland. We have to make sure that they are appropriately sized. They used the wrong size on this one. She drove up the hill. It went basically ass over tea kettle and landed on her and killed her. Exceeding the rated capacity of the equipment, making sure that we're properly sizing that. We have to remember that your product is about 8 pounds per gallon, right? It's about 8 pounds per gallon. And so if we're talking 25 gallons, I can't math very well, but that's a lot of weight. And then even worse, if it's about half empty, then if we don't have the baffles in there, it's sloshing around. So that's, 150 pounds that's pulling you one way or the other if you hit a washout or anything like that, and it flips you over. Overrated capacity by 55 pounds was the cause, or one of the causes of this. And then driving uphill instead of backing up the hill, we see that as one of the things that we could do to reach is put the weight above you as opposed to behind you to prevent that backward flip as you're driving uphill, whether that's in the side by side or in the ATV. If we back up, if we lose control of that vehicle, all it's going to do is roll down the hill straight. Until you hit the wash and then whatever. But it's the best we could do as far as craftsmanship and technical things out in the field. This one was a fatality in county government. The weed control officer out in Gold Valley back in 2014. Same thing, driving downhill, hit the washout, flipped front to back, landed on him, died of mechanical asphyxiation. That's just a fancy way of basically being too much weight on his chest and he suffocated. Kind of a horrible way to die out there in the middle of nowhere all by yourself. So those are kind of the hazards that you face if you're using this type of equipment. We also recently had a side-by-side accident that was a near fatality just this past year. Actually happened on Juneteenth this past year. So it just because you're a side-by-side, you're not safe. You're safer than the ATVs. And so that's one of our points that we try to press out to our county people, that we would prefer, from an occupational safety standpoint, that the quads go away and we move completely to side-by-sides or something with a roll cage and a seat belt. Some of the other things that we really push is helmets. If you're operating a side-by-side or an ATV for work, you should be wearing a DOT style approved helmet. About a third of all ATV, UTV injuries and fatalities are due to traumatic brain injury. It's from smacking your head on the roll cage. It's from getting ejected from the vehicle, your head crushed by the vehicle, things like that. DOT approved helmets can help prevent or mitigate the damage that you're going to suffer with that. One of the other things we push is always wearing a seatbelt in those side-by-sides. I know nobody wears a seatbelt in your side-by-side, but that roll cage cannot help you if you're not held inside the vehicle. If you're ejected or partially ejected from the vehicle, you are putting yourself in a higher rate of danger. So if it has a seatbelt, you should be wearing the seatbelt. The final point that we kind of boil down to is checking your terrain. That is doing a constant and evolving hazard assessment of the terrain that you're operating in. It's not one day, at the beginning of your job, you look at the hill and you're like, oh, okay, right? It's as you're operating constantly throughout the day, you're constantly scanning your terrain and making decisions to either defer or park your vehicle and now pull hose, or maybe call up the drone operator and have them spray that section because it's not safe for you to be back in there with an off-road vehicle. Something like that. Always checking your terrain is one of the things that you could do with that. What I'm going to do right now is I'm going to switch slides real quick, and I'm going to pull up a video that we recently produced. This video is actually made and kind of stars the survivor of our near fatality this last June. He was nice enough to sit down and explain what happened to him when he was operating this past summer, and kind of explain the accident that he almost died in. So by sharing it, we hope to kind of shed a little light that, hey, nobody goes to work in the morning expecting that they're going to be hurt, right? Nobody goes to work and does a task expecting to have an accident. But it can happen to each and everybody at any time. And then using those controls that we have, wearing the helmets, using the seatbelts, doing a good hazard assessment of the terrain that we're spraying at can be one of the ways that we limit our chances of getting hurt on the job. So I'm just going to switch real quick here.
I took on the job as a seasonal retirement job. When I got in there, I understood that there were some risks, but I certainly didn't expect what happened to happen that day. We got everything loaded up, started that morning. As you get closer to the west end of that particular highway, the rights of way get very, very steep. They'd cautioned me that the steepness could be a problem, and if I got to a point where it seemed to be too steep, that the best way to go about getting that done would be to back up the side hill and then spray on the way down, which I got to a point I did. I couldn't get high enough up on the side hill to actually cover what I wanted to cover. There's a side hill that had quite a bit of spurge plants on it, and I actually stopped and considered how I could best cover that. It looked to me like I could drive straight up a portion of that side hill and just make a swing across there and catch most of it. What happened was I had to slow enough to make the turn, and at that point everything shifted and the side-by-side started to roll. I don't know how many times it rolled, but at the end of it I was partially ejected, and the top of the roll bar cab enclosure came to rest right at my midsection, right below my rib cage. So obviously I was trapped under there. But what was fortunate for me was the county road superintendent happened to be in the area, and he came upon it almost immediately, and he was able to wedge that underneath the side-by-side and release just enough of the weight off to where I didn't feel the immense pressure that I was feeling. But I kept asking him to get it higher and get it higher because the pain was still quite intense. The second fortunate part of that was he had another member of his crew that was in the area with a skid steer. That is what was able to eventually release me. So by the time emergency personnel got there, they were already in the process of lifting it. The EMTs were there then to pull me out from underneath it. They were concerned that I was doused with chemicals, so they cut off all my clothing. Things were starting to get really hard. I assumed I was bleeding. The air ambulance has already been dispatched and was already there waiting for me. Basically what had happened to me was I'd torn my small intestine in 3 different places, and they ended up removing 20 inches of my small intestine. The surgeon did come through as I was being released from ICU into the surgical recovery. 3 days earlier, he didn't think I was going to make it. While I was spraying, while I was in the side-by-side, I did not have a seatbelt on. I was not wearing a helmet, and those things would have mitigated the damage that I ended up sustaining. What I would have done it if I could do it over again is I would have driven past that patch of spurge. Make sure you're using all the protective equipment that you can. Rolling down a side hill in a side-by-side, that can possibly kill you. So my advice would be just familiarize yourself with the equipment first and foremost, and utilize the protective safety equipment that it has. There isn't a patch of leafy spurge that is worth risking injury or your life. Always wear your seatbelt, always wear your helmet, and always check your terrain.
Always wear your helmet.
I always wear my seatbelt.
Always check your terrain.
Sharing your story about something that traumatic. I mean, he was literally maybe about a minute away from death, or you could think about it literally about an inch and a half. If it would have landed an inch and a half higher up on his chest instead of his abdomen, he's meat. He's gone. Um, but thank you to him for sharing his story, because he's really motivated that he doesn't want this to happen to anybody else. And of course, we don't want that to happen as either. So when we are operating those ATVs and those UTVs, 3 things to remember: always wear a DOT approved helmet, always wear a seatbelt if it's equipped on your vehicle, if you have a seatbelt, and then that train checking as well, right? In the video Dennis was talking about, he attempted to back up the hill like they told him to, and then when he couldn't, and then he tried to figure out another way as opposed to the safest procedure that was authorized. Because we're North Dakotans and we're hardworking people, right? He's a retiree and he's still out there busting his ass, right? He wanted to get the job done to get that spurge done. So he figured out a way and he took the risk and then he paid for it, right? So that constant terrain check that, hey, this is unsafe for the equipment I'm using or the procedure that I'm using, okay? Those three things could have changed the entire scenario that we dealt with here. So don't let it happen to you. Again, I work at the Association of Counties. I'll probably leave a bunch of cards somewhere. Even if you're not a county employee, if you need some help with ATV, UTV safety or safety training or something like that, go ahead and feel free to reach out to me. Our whole thing at the CEG is that nobody makes enough money to get hurt at work. And we want you to go home with all your fingers and all your toes every night. But anyway, thank you all. And thanks to Merlin and everybody for inviting me to speak. I appreciate your time and attention. Thank you.